I took AHIP 2023 at 10:30 at night. I finished at about 11:15 with a 98%. First try. Here's what I thought of this year's AHIP, and here's how you can pass it with as much ease as I did. This video is sponsored by none other than Lead Heroes, you guys. Lead Heroes has got you covered when it comes to telemarketed leads and virtual staffing. On the lead side, whether it be Medicare supplement leads, final expense leads, turning 65 leads, they just got something for everybody. They can also actually have you plug in with one of their virtual staff members on the staffing side to where you can pay by the hour for one of their trained and very well vetted staff members to help you out in your business in a virtual assistant format. Just because you watch this video, they're going to give you 10% off any order you make on their website. Link to the site can be found down in the description, so go ahead and check them out. AHIP is a Medicare agent's nemesis, right? AHIP is a certification test that all agents need to take and pass with a 90% score or above within 3 tries in order to become certified and ready to sell for both Medicare Advantage products with pretty much every single insurance company and Part D prescription drug plans with pretty much every single insurance company, okay? It costs $175, but if you take it through a carrier, a lot of times they'll discount it for $50 off and give it to you for $125. It's a 50-question test. It's timed for 2 hours long, and this is what you need to know. So if you've never taken AHIP before, AHIP is something that does not just thrust you into a test. There's actually a training curriculum that you end up having to go through before you're able to even pass the test. They give you what's known as modules, which is essentially like a slideshow that you can go through on different topics. So you actually have 5 modules, modules 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they each cover a different subject. And the first couple of modules are usually about, Medicare basics, Medicare 101. They're pretty simple. And then you get into compliance, regulations, the further you go, and just different kinds of things like that. And this year in particular, modules 1, 2, and 3, from my experience, were pretty much exactly the same as the year before, or almost identical. They didn't even make you go through the entire modules if you didn't want to. You could click on the modules and you could skip right to the end and do the review questions at the end. At the end of every module, they're going to have review questionnaires that you are able to take. It's like a practice test, if you will, which those practice tests, I will tell you this, are incredibly valuable. They have about 20 questions on each practice test this year, which in years past, they've only had about 10 questions. So at the end of each module, there's 20 practice questions. Those practice questions are the exact same questions that are on your final exam. So if you do well on the practice questions and you make sure that you know the questions, you know the answers, you're going to do exceptionally well on the final exam. So it's more about the practice questions than it is about the final exam, because if you can get the practice questions down, it's the same thing as getting the final exam down. So just keep that in mind. And you can keep retrying on the practice questions as many times as you want. So that way you can go through it, take it as many times as you want. For me, I took the practice tests over and over and over until I got 100% on it. So that way I felt comfortable moving on from that section and with those particular questions. But like I was saying a second ago, on modules 1, 2, and 3, it does not even make you go through the modules this year. In years past, you had to go through each and every module's slide and then take the practice test at the end before you could move on to the next section. This year, on modules 1, 2, and 3, you don't even have to go through the modules. It will give you an option at the beginning where you can click a button and it will skip all the way to the practice test at the end because there's virtually no changes in those first 3 modules. That is not the case in module 4 and 5, to where you actually have to go through the entire slides in order to get to the very end. The key and the name of the game, my friends, is mastering those practice questions. The practice questions made up, probably for me, if I had to put a number on it, 95% of my test. They were questions that I had already seen before, and by the time I got to my final exam, the questions were rather familiar to me. That's why when I had 2 hours to take my test, it only took me 45 minutes to get through it because I was familiar with all of the questions already to this point. If you're brand new and you don't know anything about Medicare, there's only one way to get through AHIP. Study, read it, make sure that you know the material. There is no other way. Don't just click through it. Don't just guess on questions and answers. That's a recipe for failure. With a lot of insurance companies, not all, but with a lot of insurance companies, if you fail AHIP 3 times, they will not let you certify with their company for this coming selling season and into next year. So that's a major, major problem. And if you actually have clients on the books and you fail to pass AHIP, there's a good chance with most carriers that you will actually lose your clients and lose your book of business with said carrier. So we don't want to do that. I have shared videos in the past where about AHIP in maybe last year and the year before, where at the beginning of my career, I did struggle with AHIP. So this comes from a place from somebody that was not always really, really good at getting through AHIP and really, really good at taking these certification tests and questions. What ended up making the difference for me is making sure that I understood the material, making sure that I was reading the material, and that is going to make a world of difference. Now, the new Medicare rules and regulations were addressed in the AHIP for 2023. It essentially mentions that you have to be recording your entire sales call with that when you're talking to a prospective new member or a new client. It doesn't have to just be, you don't have to only record the part where you're actually doing the sales process. It's the entire phone call. They did address that. They did specifically mention phone calls. So as I have suspected, there is nothing to indicate that I have seen that it includes face-to-face, but we will probably hear more from the carriers as this gets close to October 1st. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, I'm referencing the new Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services final rule that came out a couple of months ago about some tightened up marketing regulations where insurance agents, Medicare agents were going to have to be recording their phone calls if you're selling a Medicare Part D prescription drug plan or a Medicare Advantage plan, and then you have to keep them on record and file for up to 10 years. So that was addressed, confirmed, and like I said, it mentioned specifically, without a shadow of a doubt, in my opinion, to my interpretation, phone calls. It specifically said calls. So it did go through that. There were a couple of changes in some regulations for next year, not a ton, but there were a few things that were different. So I do encourage you to take your time and go through it, read it, especially if you're brand new, you want to read all of them. It might not take you a day or, 4 or 5 hours to get through it like it did me from start to finish, right? From starting the module 1 to the end of the final exam and the final test, okay? It might take you a couple of days if you're brand new. Remember, I'm a seasoned veteran. I've almost been doing this for 10 years. So this is not my first go around with AHIP. It's not my first rodeo. And it's very, very important to not compare yourself because I've been doing this a long time and AHIP is not terribly different from one year to the next, right? So the information is fresh in my head. The other thing is once you get through AHIP, you will have to go through some general compliance and fraud, waste, and abuse certification testing as well. It's not as difficult, and you can take it as many times as you want, those types of tests. So you can fail it 10 times and you're still going to be able to take it, but you will need to pass those tests as well. They're much shorter, but you will need to take and pass those tests as well to get your AHIP approved certificate. So do not forget about fraud, waste, and abuse and general compliance. Once you're done with AHIP, you can transmit it to the different carriers. Some carriers, it might not work transmitting it, which typically it doesn't. The website's kind of garbage. But you can, if that doesn't work, you can go into the carrier's site, their certification page, and you can actually log into AHIP through that carrier, and then that usually transmits it over and kind of fixes all bugs. But AHIP, not terribly different this year. It wasn't, and I didn't find it terribly difficult this year. So believe in yourself, don't shortchange yourself, and I would get it out of the way sooner rather than later. I was actually originally planning on not doing AHIP for maybe a couple of months and putting it off this year, which is unlike me. It's against my nature because I usually like to try to get it done right away, and then within a day or two of it coming out, I changed my mind, did it late at night, and just kind of blew right through it. And it feels great to have that monkey off my back for yet another year. Anyway, guys, I hope this was helpful. I hope this kind of gave you some tips and tricks to kind of get through AHIP. You guys can do this. I believe in you. Remember, you can download the modules as well if you want to and kind of go search through those. If you're having trouble finding the answer to a question, it's an open book test. You got this. People make it harder than it needs to be, but make sure that you're prepared and you know the material before you take the final exam. You only get 3 tries. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do me a favor, smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. It helps me find more agents like you who need help, who need to find this content. Comment your thoughts down below. What did you think of AHIP this year? If you have taken it already. If you haven't, are you afraid? Are you nervous? I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts and have a dialogue with you. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and join the notification squad so you're notified when we upload. And until next time, guys, thanks so much for watching. Here's to your success and your abundance. I'll see you at the top. Thanks, guys.